Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD television. I'm Steve Lance. And despite lack of support from House GOP leadership, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado pushing a resolution to impeach President Biden. And all Republicans voted to send the articles of impeachment to the Homeland Security Committee for future consideration. So, Melina, tell us more about this vote and what McCarthy had to say about it.
So this House vote ultimately turned into one that gave hesitant Republicans a way out of a tough vote. It was originally launched by Congresswoman Lauren Boebert as a privileged motion, which would have forced the House to directly vote on whether or not to impeach President Biden. However, leadership was unhappy with this, saying that it would undermine current investigations into the Biden family's business dealings and Biden's border policies. Here's what House Speaker Kevin McCarthy had to say before convincing Lauren Boebert to make this a less consequential vote.
It would discredit if the American public sits back and looks at you just move something onto the floor as serious as impeachment for 2 days, never going through a committee, never showing to the American public the case.
He later convinced Boebert to turn her resolution into a rule which simply sends this articles of impeachment to the Homeland Security Committee for further consideration on whether or not Biden's border policies warrant impeachment. Some Democrats accuse Republicans of trying to deflect from Trump's legal issues.
That while you want to distract and deflect from all of Donald Trump's legal problems, and they continue to mount, I think there'll be probably more charges we expect in the coming weeks, in the coming months.
And for her part, Congresswoman Boebert argued on the House floor that President Biden has essentially eroded the separation of powers with his current border policies. Take a look.
By nullifying our immigration and border security laws through a systematic lack of enforcement, President Biden has not only threatened the lives of countless Americans with its fentanyl crisis and increased crime.
Later, we heard from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been pushing articles of impeachment of her own. She tells me that this initiative was actually started and initiated by her.
I introduced articles impeaching Joe Biden on the border issue first, and then asked her to co-sponsor them. And then she copied my articles and wrote her own, and then introduced them and did a privilege resolution.
Now, Greene says she plans to file these articles of impeachment as privilege motions so that she can push these impeachment proceedings as she sees fit. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The White House rolling out the red carpet for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What the two leaders say as tensions with China continue to mount. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
Welcoming Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the White House on Thursday, President Biden vows to bolster ties with the world's biggest democracy.
And to cherish freedom and celebrate the democratic values of universal human rights, a partnership that is among the most consequential in the world, that is stronger, closer, and more dynamic than any time in history.
The high-profile state visit comes with a grand welcome ceremony, a state dinner tonight,
it is an exceptional privilege,
and a rare joint address to Congress. It also comes as U.S. and India announce a flurry of deals on defense and technology, including a purchase by India of U.S. spy drones that could help India detect and counter moves by the Chinese military.
This will give our defense cooperation a new character in the times to come.
U.S. officials say that Washington wants India to be a strategic counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific region. And the Biden-Modi meeting comes on the heels of Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to Beijing, and just days after President Biden called China's Xi Jinping a dictator. Today, when asked if his comments could complicate his administration's efforts to try to ease tensions with Beijing, and President Biden said no.
The idea of my choosing and avoiding saying what I think is the facts with regard to the relationship with India, with China, is just not something I'm going to change very much.
And President Biden asked that what makes U.S. relation with India different from that with China is the fact that India is a democracy. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Biden administration is making headlines when it comes to relations with the Chinese Communist Party. President Biden referring to Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping as a dictator right after Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Xi. With some reaction to Blinken's visit to China, we sat down with Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania to discuss. Congressman Scott Perry, thank you so much for taking a moment to sit down and chat.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. High-level overview, Secretary Blinken still making headlines after visiting China, first time in 5 years, Secretary of State from the U.S. visiting Beijing. What do you make of his trip thus far?
First of all, I think look, obviously relationships and relations are strained, and we shouldn't have any reservations about acknowledging that. At the same time, the Chinese Communist Party set the tone with this new administration at their first meeting in Alaska, when the new administration came in, and they essentially schooled Tony Blinken and everybody else on the crew. And I imagine that they feel pretty emboldened by all that. We want to have a better relationship, so I think it's important that diplomacy works. But what we can't have is any illusions or delusions of who the Communist Party of China is, who Xi is, and what we're facing. And I'm not sure that Blinken, no, I am sure Blinken is not up to the task. Now, he's in the position. I just don't see it being good for America. Unfortunately, this is what we've got to work with, so we're going to have to make the best of it.
I'm going to follow up on that in just a moment, but I do want to get your reaction. The headline's still coming out right now. President Biden referring to Xi Jinping as a dictator, which he is, and Chinese state-run media not taking kindly to that.
Well, you already said it, which he is. Look, the whole world knows it. My goodness, we're pretty sure that President Biden doesn't really even know where he's waking up in the morning. I mean, for goodness, he said, ended his speech with "God save the Queen," right? Recently. So the fact that he recognizes Xi as a dictator publicly, it has to happen. That's what Xi is. No one should be offended. No one should be upset. Least of which Xi. Now, I'm sure they're going to feign, this outrage and so on and so forth, but that's who he is, that's what he is, and the sooner we acknowledge what we're dealing with, the sooner we can get on with what has to be done about it.
So, Congressman, oftentimes when high-ranking U.S. officials and delegations go to China, human rights is off the table. How important is it to discuss these serious issues with the Chinese Communist Party at the highest levels?
First of all, human rights are one of the things that America is the beacon of hope for around the world. It's one of the things that defines us. And of course, it's not to say that we're perfect. We've had our own struggles, but we have done yeoman's work and made unbelievable strides, much more than every other country, much more than every other country. So. And so we do have the moral authority, the moral high ground, and the moral responsibility, and just the responsibility as human beings to question the things that are happening in China. As you know, we're living in the 21st century where there are literally concentration camps. We've seen the footage. We've seen the people lined up on the concrete. We've seen the high fences. These are not prisons. These are literally concentration camps, and America has to say something. Well, the whole world, 50, 60, 70 years ago said never again. We never want to see this again, and yet much of the world is countenancing it. It is accepting it. It is refusing to acknowledge it for profits, for ease of relationships. Unacceptable. We have to say something.
Congressman Scott Perry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.